Good morning, neighbors. Attribute data is the theme for the talk this morning, the conversation. It's another Google for you, maybe, if you haven't considered or thought about attribute data. If you just Google those two words, attribute data, you'll get computer-based responses. Mine came back as information about SQL queries. If you dig a little further, there's really two types of data stored in computers. There's attribute data and there's variable data. That's a macro level view of data structures, right? So why are attributes important? I'm going to say a good 4 years of my career was in developing the notions and the concepts and the value of attribute data. So this is a very big word, a very big concept, but it's also a linguistic magical word, putting attributes against things, attributes against people. And it's attribute data. What do you think the Googles are storing out there? Attributes about your purchasing habits, your credit cards, your credit score. Targeted marketing. There's no point in trying to sell me a Cadillac. And if they don't have to waste the money doing it, why bother, right? That is attribute data. Attributed data assigned to a credit card, attributed data assigned to a vehicle purchase decades ago, MVSS standards, and the industry itself realizes the value of historical information to assess good decisions versus bad decisions. All from attribute data. Attributes, huge word, just massive word, can go in many different directions depending on which room you're in, right? If I walked into a database structures room, a question about information and what we're collecting, what were we collecting? Well, something as simple as a car's fender fit. When you look at a car fender, do you look at the gap down the fender line? You probably only notice it if it's off, if it's askew, if it's agape, if it's just doesn't look right. So that simple question about fender fit, there's different actions you need to do. If it's really bad, well, you want to stop the production line and fix that fender, right? Or plan to fix that fender and know about it to fix that fender. Or go back in the process to fix what caused that fender not to fit properly. What broke back there? When you're building something one job a minute, you're putting one fender on a minute on a vehicle, well, that's things happen. Production breakdowns happen. The robots fail. A little block somewhere comes off by a fraction of a millimeter, enough to cause holes to be misaligned, punched for screws that hold the fender on. So this attribute data collection is well studied. It gave me an insight and technical ability with those scanners that are reading our voting tickets. Those scanners that read and store documents for record. Very sophisticated pieces of technology. Look at your printer. Consider your printer. It tells you when it's running out of ink. It'll reorder ink for you now. So this idea of attributes, the value of attributes when they're slung upon somebody, says the bearded fool, right? So these attributes, what are other attributes? One of my attributes was I had a sergeant before my name. That's an attribute. What's the value of that attribute? Which side am I on? Having that attribute many decades ago put against my history. These attributes, tracking attributes, logging them, This is a discussion in data structure, data storage. Do you store these attributes for a day or a week or a month or a year or 10 years or 30 years? Is there state or federal regulations because of, let's say, interstate commerce rules about the data you can and can't keep? Those conversations are had for different reasons. The conversations are had because it costs money for storage. Data storage planning. You have to be involved to understand that world. Those racks of computers in custom buildings that are hardened against multiple failure scenarios just to store data. Data centers. That's what we typically call them. Some of them look like warehouses out there in a building complex. Others are hardened bunkers. Or even better, a lot of our data was put into mines when data was on paper and referenced and cataloged and put into boxes and sent off in a truck to be stored for 30 years due to requirements. And then computers came along. And things got easier and things got harder for a few that have to try to understand the background, the back doors, the back rooms, the back office meetings about data. And whether it is attribute data or variable data. Number structures, right? Geez, it's complicated. It is not a 0 or a 1. It never was. But then you get into the word of norms. Attribute data for norms, right? What's an attribute for a norm? Anyway, 6 minutes, long enough. Attribute data, there's different ways you have to add other qualifiers onto those two words in order to see its applicability elsewhere, the epistemology of attribute data. But really, it's about the value of attribute data. Data is the single largest industry on the planet now. Raw data itself. There are hints all over about that. But for better or worse, right? Pieces of attributes, the weight of attributes. More to come.